Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chicago IANDS. Today, we've got great things going on. But we'll take just a moment, as we usually do, for a brief meditation. And so if you're holding things or if you're in any position that's causing stress, relax. Get yourself comfortable and allow yourself to let yourself slip into that meditative state that we all know and love. So we begin to change the energy around this meeting and bring in all our friends from the other side. Welcome back. So some of you might have been hearing we were talking about how I choose the speakers and how my guides are the ones really who choose the speakers. And that Jake was guided to send me an email, and I was guided to respond. And I'm so grateful. He has a wonderful book, and he has another one that will be coming out soon. He'll tell you about that. He's in Long Island, and he's a LCSW, social worker trained person who does past life regressions and other kinds of counseling to help people understand the value and the importance of the other side. So I'm just going to turn the speaker over to you, Jake. I should mention first that next month, Dave Bennett will be speaking for us. Please go to the website and read about Dave so that you'll know about that. And then I'm going to turn the speaker over to Jake. It's all yours, Jake. Welcome. So glad to have you here.
Okay, thank you all for coming here today in your Saturday afternoon. And thank you, Diane and Chicago IANDS. for opening up your virtual doors for myself. Just a true pleasure to be here at this hour today. Um, as Diane mentioned, professionally, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work with clients from the ground up. I do private therapy sessions. I also do, different groups that involve anything from mindfulness to hypnotherapy, past life regression, and all these things that I use are both individually and in group. But I am an author. I wrote a book, Life After Breath, which is available on Amazon. It's been endorsed by Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in 1975, along with Anita Morjani, Suzanne Giesemann. So it's doing well. And I have another book coming out towards the next couple of months called The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, which is just another fascinating book from what I'm told. It's been endorsed by people like Dr. Gary Schwartz, Suzanne Giesemann, Dr. Bernie Siegel, to name a few, and both are with a publisher called Waterside. Life After Breath is a little bit of my karma, or my story of my near-death experience and how I live with that and how it impacted my life, which is a little bit of a segue for today's dialogue. And the wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is more of my dharma, my purpose, my meaning. So I once saw a quote that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of it is to give it away. And I think all of us are very gifted and intuitive and very much full of gifts. That's our natural state. And so hopefully within coming to these workshops, we'll see the near-death experiencers, but really it's just a reflection of what we remember within ourselves, our own infinite, eternal selves. And so I hope through this talk today and reading my books and some of the other speakers that we're not put on pedestals. We're just kind of people just like you, but we're just mirrors of the beauty and eternity that each and every one of you has had. So from discussing with Diane, I'm kind of new to the group. Obviously, it's my first time, but today I'm going to be, just talking a bit about my near-death experience, the narrative of it, what exactly happened, and then I'll be talking about a little bit about what life was like with this near-death experience. So a little bit of a microcosm of life after breath, here. And then after just a short break, around the 4 o'clock time. And then after, I really would love any kind of questions, not to sound overconfident. I am from New York. I've heard it all. You can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So bring your questions. And that's almost my favorite part, because I'm a guy, as you've seen, and guys kind of think with blinders on, and we just kind of know what we know. But if you ask us questions, those blinders come off. We look at this in a different way, and it allows me to kind of evolve how I look at the near-death experience and consciousness. And so that makes me most excited, is a different way of looking at things. And I was asked in an interview this past week, what is consciousness? And I said, consciousness is one of the most open-ended conditions that we have. Someone asked me to define it, and I said, it's not something that can necessarily be definable, because each and every day we could have a new interpretation of our worldview. We could have a new interpretation of our reality. But here in near-death experiences, hopefully will broaden one's consciousness and one's worldview to remind us that we cannot die, that we are eternal, and we have infinite love inside of us and all around us. And even in those darkest moments, such as near-death experiences, we're able to really find that light. And sometimes we can really see those stars within the dark of the night. We need the dark of the night. In my experience, has both of that. But at the end of the day, as Wayne Dyer would say, you take an orange, you squeeze it out, you get orange juice. And you take all of us out, you squeeze all of us out. Infinite, pure, cosmic love when all is said and done. And that's our true self. So I want to take you back. This is nearing my 30th anniversary. This exact time of my near-death experience was actually in September of 1993. I know Diane mentioned that she had her what Mark Anthony, if you know who Mark Anthony is, not Jennifer Lopez Mark Anthony, but Mark Anthony's psychic lawyer, he mentions near-death experience is kind of like extending that rubber band when you cross over and then coming back, with it, but you just come back different. And I know Diane mentioned she had her heavenly experience in 1995. So we are 2 years apart, in many ways, right? But I had my almost 29th anniversary experience of my near-death experience. For those of you who don't know anything about me or my background, who haven't read Life After Breath, I do come from an Orthodox Jewish background. I was raised traditional, observant, but I came from a family that observed the holidays. And so my near-death experience came right around the time of what was just this past week, a day called Yom Kippur, which for those of you who do not know is translated as a day of atonement, but the day in which your soul is getting ready for itself to meet the creator, or we call Yahweh, or whatever you want to phrase it as. But a day of really manifestation, a day of atonement, a day to really cleanse oneself to lead an abundant year. Little did I know I was about to meet the creator, but it was a much different creator that was, within my tradition religion. It was more of an inner God than an outer God than anything else. September 1993, I had my near-death experience, and this is a different trajectory than what most of you have probably seen with traditional near-death experiencers, in a sense that I was just 3 years old, which leads to a lot of controversy within my near-death experience, but I think controversy is good. It allows people to look at things differently, think differently. We all say we are spiritual beings having this human experience. And so with that, our bodies, our ages, our personality, all this stuff is temporary. Behind that is an infinite, timeless soul. And so my near-death experience, the majority of what I experienced was not the surface of the water of the ocean, but the depth of who I was, and through those eyes. Just to preface, so yes, I still was 3 years old. I was experiencing that, but beyond that, beyond all of ourselves is a timeless, ageless soul that's temporary, having these different experiences in different bodies, different cultures, different genders, whatever have you. But beyond that, is much, much more an accumulation of all these things that we experience. So my near-death experience happened when I went to a playground in September of 1993. I went with family friends. At the time, I have very little recollection of my childhood other than experiences of profound nature, an experience that happened beyond this 5D reality. I just remembered, and I talk about this in Life After Breath, how I had an eerie feeling, and I woke up nights before that something profound was on the horizon. I just didn't know what it was. And so when I was in the car, I just remembered getting a feeling as if, again, the same feeling as something profound was going to happen. I was able to see this vortex in the corner of my awareness, but I ignored it. But it felt as if something quite familiar was about to transpire and profound that I didn't fully, become aware of until it happened. So I went to the park, it's the playground, and I just played like any other day, except, in the back of my awareness, I knew something was going to happen. And as I went to the playground, I started climbing up a ladder onto a slide. And as I was climbing up each rung of the ladder, my breathing became more belabored and more resuscitated. And towards the end of this, eventually, all of my breath was taken away from me. And so I guess clinically, we could describe that as suffocating. Just to preface, I had a condition that's called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which for infants, children, and even in cases of adults could be fatal if left untreated. And so, this was the scariest moment of my life. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but the trauma combined with how this was beyond my brain is the reason why I do believe I'm able to have full recall of this without hesitation, as if it was just yesterday. But once my breathing, stopped, I was in a very frightened, scary place where the breath really kind of makes us human and alive. And so when that breath is taken from us, you're just kind of put in this place where you're just suffering and you feel very isolated and you just are in unfamiliar territory where you're not feeling like you're alive, but you're not dead. You're just in this period of incubation, kind of a little bit what Dr. Eben Alexander talked about with his early stages, of the earth eye view or earthworm view, something like that, when he was just in this incubation period. But after having this, I just noticed that my body wasn't working. It was as if I was in a basement of a house and I turned off each power breaker in the basement and all were turned off. And so rather than being in a car that wasn't working, I decided to get out of the car and pop the hood and see what was going on. So I remember that I was able to get outside my body and I was able to have a profound awareness. I don't think most, Harvard or Yale trained medical doctors would have had, the body. And, I was able to really have a scanning and awareness of the different parts of my body. And then slowly became aware of my brain. And I was aware of that my brain was shutting down, was suffocated. And I was able to really understand my brain and its purpose, of just a real kind of filter in life. But then moments later, I've just felt the largest and loudest crack within my brain, as if you just have a power cord and the power cord is in a wall and just yank that cord out. And for me, that's what happened to my brain. I felt this large crack. And once my brain, cracked open, that's when God and whatever you want to call it, the spirit realm came in, which I hope doesn't happen. That literally happened to me. As the saying says, my brain had to crack open in half for God of the spirit realm to come in. But once this happened, I was racing down an insane speed. And the closest analogy that I could have is as if you're in a roller coaster ride and you're going 1,000 miles an hour, as fast as the speed of light, but you're going upwards to the innermost part of your being in the true home that we have, what we call the other side. And so I had a lot of the classical near-death experience sensations, such as the tunnel, the darkness, but I was able to really enter this familiar place. I do want to preface, when I went to the other side and when I crossed over to this light, it felt as if, imagine the most euphoric experience that you could possibly have in this lifetime. Now imagine that multiplied by infinite, where there's no end to how good you could possibly feel. And for me, that's what's happening to me when I was going and crossing over. There was no limit to how high, how good, how amazing I felt at this moment. It was as if, living in our bodies, we're almost limited by being bio-neurochemical. And we're out of the bodies, we're in the home of who we are. We're at the pinnacle of, life itself, where there's no end of it. And there's just endless climax of euphoria. And that for me was what my first experience of crossing over and just the adjustment. But then slowly I became aware of my right side of my head. I was able to go back in and out, and to the right side of my head, I was able to see a beautiful golden palace right by it. And this palace was quite familiar. But when I was looking at it, that the lights were so profound and the colors were so beyond anything of this world that it was just almost too much for me to look at. I just had to shield myself, as if you take a fish and just throw it into water. For me, there was an adjustment phase from the intense trauma that I was experiencing, suffocation, to now this intense euphoria. It was the biggest seesaw ride of my life that I could possibly have. But then moments later, I was able to hear intense choirs, from this palace. And I was able to see angels in this palace and light that was so profound that I just had to shield myself. But these lights, these colors, were beyond anything that we have here. In a sense, the light had an energy and a personality of itself, as if it was like dancing in front of you. It wasn't just solid. It was you could look through it almost. And it had just a profound, piercing energy. And then moments later, I just began to kind of see this kind of bronze kind of energy, or this kind of light that was flashing in front of me. And I was just aware of this sensation, or this kind of pitch, or this frequency on the other side, which I immediately knew was Christ consciousness. And it wasn't that Jesus Christ himself was in front of me, it was deeper than that. It was the embodiment, the energy of Christ itself was the voice, or the frequency that I was experiencing on the other side. And when I was in this frequency, um, I was able to really feel a sense of ease, as if all was well, will be well, and has been well. And that's not something that any of us are used to. We're used to tensing ourselves for Tuesday, or next week, or next year, or worrying about what's next to come, or worried or sad about what's past. I was in this intense place where there was no time, and there was a trust in this moment, this eternal moment. And going into the palace that I was in, it almost, the closest um, verbiage that I could have that's very overused, but for our convenience, is I was in direct experience with God. And for me, God is where all things emanate from. And it is the endless pinnacle of reality itself. And when I was with God in this experience, there was this endless force, this endless climax, which we all are a part of. We have this earth plane, but then we cross over. There's this endless um, emanation of where life comes from, and all things are created from, in this endless creative source. And that was what I experienced. And the best way I could describe it is God, but that is quite limiting, as we all have a part of that. We all are connected to that. God is within all things, but the exact direct source was what I experienced, the all that ever is and ever was, will be. And then moments later, I was able to come back to my body on the top of the slide, and I was able to see my own spirit guides, which I know Diane referenced early on in our conversation, which connected us. But to the right side and left side of me were a distinct female and male guide. Now, to preface, at the time, I knew their exact names. And to this day, I have ideas, but it wasn't as loud and clear of a knowing. Today, it's more of a faith or a belief in their names. But at the time, it was a clear, without question, knowing, as if I'm looking in front of you as to what their names and who they are. And in looking at my guides, they were the most beautiful, magnificent beings that I could possibly imagine. But I felt, again, not from their judgment, but from my own perspective, a sense of embarrassment, how I forgot that these beautiful beings were around me this entire time. See, so much of a life we walk around thinking that this is a random human existence here to pay the bills and save up for our 401ks and just play this game. But no, there is so much inside of us and all around us that sometimes we have amnesia or forgetfulness of. And this NDE reminded me of this. But moments later, I was becoming aware that the guides were able to work with my physical body and push me down the slide. And I felt my body going down the slide. Moments later, I became aware of all the people that I went to in the park on that day. And they were looking at my body, they were calling my name. I was aware of them, but again, that suffocation continued where I just wanted to grab them and shake them, but I could see them and they couldn't see me. So it was a little bit, on my end, difficult or torturous, where I can understand how spirits are when they try to come through to us or during readings, they're right there around us. Love truly never ends, and that's who we are. Um, in this moment, I became aware of my body that was on the floor, but I felt myself having a form or a shape, outside of my body. And in that moment, everyone was kind of circling my name and just, checking in on me, and I was irresponsive. But in that moment, I became aware of beautiful auras around all these people that were around my body. And I really firmly understood who they were, what they were about, just beyond what I knew at that time. And it was as if I was able to really x-ray their souls and really see their true, nature, their true existence. And so for me, that really taught me that sometimes we have a monopolization or idea of what's spiritual and what's not, with people who are holy or Buddhist, whatever that is. But this just reminded me that we all are deeply spiritual. Some people act on it, remember it, but at the core of us is a spirit in this body. And so during this time, I began to look up. And as my spirit looked up, I became aware of an endless, what I call sea of angels that were literally floating right in front of me. And these angels were very youthful in their presentation. As I looked at these angels, I am my own biggest skeptic. I just was like, this is too good to be real. Like I'm making things up. It was literally right in front of me, like a thin veil that separates this physical plane. And you just turn up the radio station just a little bit, and it's right around us. So the angelic realm has different layers, as you saw, the spirit guides. But these were different than spirit guides. These were very youthful, young, childlike angels. And I just saw them, but they had no separate form of identity. They were just almost kind of like God's minions, or just an army of light. But the angels were, the spirit guides were more micro focused on me. These angels, they were very focused on purpose, and they were just kind of looking straight. They weren't looking at me. It wasn't as personalized, but they were just there without any personality other than to give pure light, pure love, pure healing. And as I was looking at these angels, I just became aware of their sound and their faces and how they were infinitely surrounding us this entire time. And this near-death experience, taught me that, the heavenly realm or the other side could feel like a million miles away, but it's also right around us, and the angels are around us at this time, and they're not far away at all. They're right here. And after that, I became aware of my own soul family that was coming in front of me. And, I think of soul family as kind of like the play of life, where we're in different roles, but we share a similar stage. And we're a part of this play and this dance through people that are part of our group. I liked how someone described soul family as almost a ray of God, or an expression of the divine, or a part of the divinity. We have different personalities, but there's a similarity within soul family. Just to backtrack, I want to just give a story of soul family for those of you interested. I had an aunt that was one of my later teens, early 20s spiritual mentor. And so when she was about to go, she was having a lot of these deathbed visions and stuff like that. But her last words to me was, if you look at a family portrait, each individual might look distinctly different, but if you look at the eyes, there's something there of that picture. There's something there. Not with all family members. I mean, some we could say, I definitely have nothing to do with that person, but the majority of it, we all have that one or two, but we're all interconnected, right? And I thought nothing of it. And then a year or two later, I was getting a mediumistic reading, and the person was picking up on my aunt, and she said, why does she keep on telling me the word picture? Why is she showing me pictures? And that was evidence and validation of her lesson of soul family, of how we are interconnected and how there's a deep part that connects us to soul family here in the physical and there on the earth plane, there on the spirit realm, I'm sorry. But as I was seeing my soul family member, I felt a sense again of this, feeling of embarrassment, where for them, they love me no matter what. But for me, I felt like a kid who had this big party to go to the military, and then I was being discharged like 2 weeks later after everyone, planned it, celebrated it, because I was just, so young at 3 years old. But in seeing them, I was aware of everyone kind of gathering around myself, and I was posed a question as to, what I will be doing, what will be my decision. You see, in near-death experiences, there's either usually one or two positions. Either you're told that you must stay, or you're told or you're given the option to do what you want to do. Usually people don't just stay there and have a near-death experience. That's called a death experience. But yeah, but well, there is no death, but you know what I'm saying. But I had a thought that came in mind where I said, if I were to stay, what is my life about? Why am I here? What's the point of staying? And then moments later, I began to have what's called as a life review, where I was able to see, feel, understand different parts of not only my life through my lens and the lens of others around me, but also this life review extended itself to different past lives and different incarnations. I do go a bit more in detail in Life After Breath of some of those incarnations, but the most recent one, for some, it could be a very sensitive topic, and others, it might be more healing to talk about this. But I had a lifetime in which I completed suicide in that lifetime. And that lifetime, I just remembered all the different people that I was involved with at that lifetime. And I became aware of, the different students that I had in that lifetime. I became aware of what happened, how I just felt very trapped and didn't see past my own suffering. And I just became aware of how completion you begin, in a sense, how this near-death experience was very closely related to that last lifetime, in a sense that I was faced in a similar circumstance. I had no hope. I was purely suffocated. I was at the abyss of reality as we know it. But through the power of surrender, surrendering to a greater force, a greater intelligence, the breath of eternity beyond the breath of the physical body being taken away, I was restored. I was revived. And if anything else, I know we'll get into some of the lessons. It's the value of trust, the value of trusting that what's inside of us and all around us has the resilience to overcome any challenge in front of us and is stronger infinitely than that. Otherwise, we would not be here if we were not meant to handle that. Maybe in rare cases, people, are meant to go, but we are meant to persevere. We are meant to learn. But in those moments, I was becoming aware of these different lifetimes. And it just reminded me how I wasn't this 3-year-old kid, how I was this eternal spirit with all these different lifetimes that I was being showcased as I was flying across the globe and just going through, these different lifetimes. And so now during this time, I asked a question again, what would be of this lifetime? And then moments later, I was shown a crowd of people that I was speaking in front of. And it wasn't like I was some pompous guru in front of people just kind of talking, but that I was speaking and I was one with people, that the energy was in unison, and that the speaker and the crowd were one with this message. And I was just in awe of how profound this vision was of healing, of transformation. And then I said, as beautiful as that is over here, and as euphoric as it is, there's nothing more profound than bringing this into this window, in a sense, to remind people that not only are we here to create heaven on earth, but literally each and every one of us has a part of heaven here on this earth. We are that. We are that what we are seeking. The kingdom is within. So moments later, I just became aware of my own body being rushed to the hospital, and stuff like that, and became aware of my body and myself just opening up on a cold hospital bed. And as I was awakening, I just became aware of this doubt that just kind of entered my mind, which was, what was I thinking, turning this down to come back to this cold hospital bed. And in that moment, the guides gave me a profound message, which I write in Life After Breath. But that message was the power of our thoughts, how we have a life that we chart and is charted by an intelligence far greater than our own. But the value of our thoughts within that life, the value with our trust, into really trusting higher thought. And so many people could live in a state of fear or trust. Albert Einstein said, the most important question that governs our life is life working with us, against us, or an ambivalent place. And so how we view that will really allow our lives to take a whole new form. But in that moment, I became aware of my mother, who was with me at the hospital. And again, that period of suffocation continued. I wanted to scream and shout as to what happened, but in that moment, I just knew I didn't have the verbiage, nor would my mother understand. I want to preface that I just heard about this recently from my father. I rarely talk about my near-death experience with my family. I separate near-death experience and state at my home because it's more of a traditional background. My father is a wonderful psychotherapist, and so he's open to this stuff. And so he told me, he said, after you had your near-death experience, you came up to me and said, Dad, something incredible happened, but it won't make sense to you right now if I try to talk about it, but one day it will. And I said this after having my near-death experience. I don't remember saying this, but I'll take credit. It sounds pretty good. My father's a very honest man, and he always keeps me grounded, like good dads do. But after this experience, I was left profoundly changed. You see, yeah, it's so, I see Sarah has a question. Afterwards, at around 4 o'clock, we'll take a short break and we'll make sure you write down your questions and we'll leave it for questions. Just want to make sure we have the structure involved because I know how could get this stuff is could get all over the map. So, but anyway, I remember just being in school and coming back to preschool and sitting in my classes, and I just remembered when I would sit down how differently my brain felt. You see, I went through brain trauma, but the trauma that I went through in the brain was healed, much like Anita Marjani, who had cancer, by this near-death experience that I had. All the trauma that I had was not all the trauma, but a lot of the physical and neurological trauma was healed from this greater intelligence, from this greater light going into, the body and the brain. But I just remembered having this sliver of light that was able to go right into my brain that I connected to. And when going to this light, I would get very quiet in moments of going into the bathroom or just moments in my classes where I just kind of zoned out. I was readily able to cross over at any moment in time to the other side. But not only that, I just continued to have these, what Neil Donald Walsh calls conversations with God or conversations with the spirit realm that I had throughout my childhood. And, I felt comfortable, but there was one moment in time in which I was seeing spirits and having interdimensional communication. And I remember, quite like it was yesterday, where I looked at a classmate and I said, do you see such and such? And the classmate just looked at me as if I was from Mars. And that just reminded me how alone I felt in this experience, where again, this suffocation, felt extended in this life, where I felt like I was the only one who had this. And so I kept this experience much to my heart. And it was a sacred experience, but it's not something that I talked about until nearly 2 decades later, which is very common for near-death experiences. For those of you familiar with PMH Atwater, who is an expert in childhood near-death and infant near-death experiences, she really attests that it takes a couple of decades for children, infants, and adults to really make sense of the near-death experiences. But my life was really profoundly changed. And in school, I struggled mightily in school, where I just was getting poor grades. And so I was a lot more comfortable over there than I was over here, like many, end years are. But to survive, I almost had to push that part away from me, to kind of fit in. But to thrive later in life, I had to make sense of this all. So my childhood was very much kind of like pushing a beach ball down in the water, but at a certain point, it had to come up. Um, but childhood was difficult. You know, being that I grew up very rule bound, and a God that felt like I just needed a cruel divorce from, and I wanted nothing a part of. And I just kind of listened to my own intuition with what I was being brought up, and I just had like this militant, obsessive religious, kind of upbringing. And that's all well and good for people who do that, but for me, I just never really bought in. I just did my own thing. I beat to my own drum. But throughout times, I was able to still connect to, the guides and my near-death experience. But it's something that I just, almost had to brush away to just kind of fit in. You see, I think most of us are brought into a world that is more in love with regurgitation than imagination. And so in school, it was just all about regurgitating, stuff and being left brained. And I think that has value, but that's not the source of who we are. Who we are is beyond our logic. Who we are is, infinite creative energy. Um, and so it was very difficult. But then things, changed. I would say, in my later teens, I remember just being an athlete and playing sports that really helped ground me, but it gave me a wonderful outlet. But then one day in sports, I got very badly injured. And so from this injury, I had to just kind of use that same intensity in a different way. And I started to take these yoga classes, which, was helping with my anxiety, and stuff like that in my early college years. But after taking these yoga classes, I just started opening up. I started reading a lot of stuff, and I was eventually able to just kind of embrace who I was. And one day I was gifted a book called Embrace by the Light by an author by the name of Betty Eadie. She was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, New York Times bestselling author. And this book came from my godmother, and she just gave it to me. And after reading Betty's book, I was just like, wow, someone else had what I had. I felt a lot of anger in a sense that I just felt like I was so special, and then all these other people are having it. So I'm like, all right, I'm not Harry Potter here, everyone, I'm not the chosen one. But it gave me at least universality and a language behind this experience that I really kept very close, but I didn't have the lexicon or the words for. I grew up kind of like that, where I would just have all these experiences, such as premonitions I speak about life after breath. But for me, it was more of a nuisance than anything else. Like when I would see something that would happen a couple moments later, where I would have like past life recollection, it was more of like something that I just frustrated me as a kid. It wasn't cool like it is, now as a kid, to just kind of fit in. I had to bury all that stuff. I didn't want any part of it, but it just kind of came to me no matter what I did. So my childhood was a little bit like Matt Damon, the movie The Hereafter, if you're familiar with that movie, where I just, kind of wanted to be a kid. I wanted to just play sports and fit in. But we know for most of us, the coolest thing that we could do is to be weird and to not fit in, looking back on it, but as kids, that's not the case, easier to follow the current than to create your own current, when you're at that age. But reading Betty's book gave me an understanding, and it reminded me a little bit of who I was and why I was here. I remembered in my near-death experience, speaking in front of people. I just wasn't sure what. I knew I had a lot of tumultuous childhood and, difficulties, which maybe we could get into a little bit later. And you could certainly read my book. I go into great detail of some of that. but I just wasn't sure what. And that just kind of reminded me, like, yeah, what you're looking for is in your own backyard. And so I was looking at all these self-help books to, like, you become the next Tony Robbins or to speak. But then I was like, geez, you got the story inside of you, and that could be helpful. So it just reminded me that all that I was searching for was in the depths of my own being and who I really was. It wasn't outside of me. I didn't have to travel 1,000 miles to find what I was looking for, to find God. You could, but God in truth was right inside of myself, in my own backyard, and it was within all of ourselves. But I just want to share one story from Life After Breath, which was I got into some kind of spat with my father at the time, and I was in my early college years. Most spats are about nothing, like whose turn is it to take out the trash, whatever it is. But this was more intense, and I was asked to stay with my grandparents for a couple of days because it was pretty out of line. And so I remember just feeling very upset. And so I walked around the corner of my house, and there was a playground that I just almost hypnotically was drawn to and walked to. And I sat in this playground, and I just sat in a place of beauty and awe, reminding myself, almost 20 years later from a near death experience, how this is not our home. This is an experience. And much like the playground that I had in my near death experience, that we are all children in God's playground. We all have a home, no matter how rejected we feel, dejected we are. We all have a place of acceptance. And that reminded me, and it was a clear recollection of how we are all children in God's playground, here to be a brothers and sisters keeper. But we're here to play, we're here to enjoy, and more importantly, remember, that where our home is, and never to forget it. At times we could feel displaced, at times we could feel homesick. And so this experience, which took my breath away, all of a sudden from remembering it, I was able to pivot, and I was able to, kind of change my consciousness, change my worldview. Um, so, but then a couple hours later, I was in a yoga workshop. And at this time, I was taking writing courses and reading courses in the lowest possible level of remedial college. I saw really no future for myself. I thought I was lucky if I got a minimum wage job, never mind to be a best-selling author. I don't say that in a place of ego, but a place of gratitude, to be of service and to be someone who has transformed through the grace of God and Spirit. But this woman came up to me, and I didn't know who she was. We were sitting in the hallway, and she said, I see you speaking in front of hundreds of people. I see an auditorium. And I'm just like, are you talking to the person behind me? You're talking to me? She goes, you're going to be a healer one day. You may not see it now, but you're going to see it. And at the time, I just thought I was lucky to work at 7-Eleven. Nothing against that, or to be, I didn't see any future. I had every reason to not believe in myself. But this angel came to me, and that Spirit, when we see things that are impossible, Spirit shows us what's beyond possible, reminds us that we are infinite, reminds us, that we are unstoppable, unlimited. That's our true nature. That we don't need to do anything to be anything. We already are all that we are seeking, inside of us, here to express itself. But from seeing this earth angel, I was just given even more validation, of what I saw. And then, throughout time, these next couple of years, I just had a lot of validation over what I saw through different intuitives that I highlight in Life After Breath, one of which was able to give evidential pieces of information without me saying a word or getting public about my past life experiences and what I saw. And so as a Taurus, I'm very grounded. I'm born in the same day as Shirley MacLaine, April 24th, and Barbara Streisand. So my nature is we are the most grounded earth signs, which, I feel is helpful because I literally try to bring heaven down to earth. But I'm also my own biggest skeptic, more than any troller on YouTube or person who has come to me. I have my biggest questions. So having this pieces of evidence of eternity was incredibly helpful. But then, from those moments on, I became aware that I should be talking about this. So rather than ever talking to my parents about this, my first ever time that I opened up was for Long Island's most respected and eldest metaphysical center called the Eyes of Learning, which I'm a board member on. And little did I know that my speaking engagement was in the same exact town that I had my near-death experience, called Levittown, which is right around where Billy Joel grew up, in Long Island. If you're familiar with, Billy Joel and parts of Long Island. But I spoke about this exact experience, the same town, almost 2 decades later, and I haven't been stopping ever since. And after speaking about my near-death experience, the first question was, "When is your book coming out?" And I'm just like, "Man, you are a New Yorker. We want it here, we want it now." But that reminded me, like, wow, I I could be an author. I could do all these things. So um, my life has had profound transformation. I just would like to share one experience that I share in Life After Breath that was, I think to me even more profound than my near-death experience, in a sense that, for myself, I could say I was a 3-year-old kid. I was in La La Land when I had this. I was just an infant. What do I know? This is all hallucinatory. I could go down that rabbit hole. But one day in my early college years, I woke up, and I know Diane is going to appreciate this. I was literally out of my body. And this was something like you see in a movie, where I just woke up and I was out of my body. And I was just like, what is going on? And I'm like, this is happening again, like 20 years later, like enough, like just let me live my life. But Spirit had different intentions. And then for weeks later, I just remember being able to laugh hysterically for no reason and sob hysterically. I just thought to myself, am I having a psychotic break? Is this a manic depressive? I didn't, my therapist had, growing up in that environment was coming on. But then moments later, I was just able to feel all energetic sources of my field and what we call chakras, or spinning discs in Sanskrit. But I felt these on a light level, but I was able to have a pure, undeniable, feeling of this on a very deep level. And so this lasted for several weeks. And then a couple weeks later, right at the time of the high holiday, which, is not a Snoop Dogg holiday where you get high. It's actually, it's just called high holiday, like an elevated time of year. Again, I don't know what's with me in September, kind of like the Walking Earth, Wind and Fire song with Remember in September. But I was in my synagogue and I literally felt myself in my soul. And I could feel a cold, cool water like energy behind, my brain and my neck. And I could feel this intense fire right in my belly, in my kidneys. And it felt like it was just, more real than real. And then slowly I felt my third eye, which was open before, but it felt like a slowly blinking eyeball. And I just almost had to take a tissue because I felt just soaking wet like an ocean. And my heart was just opened like crazy, and it felt, incredibly wet and just soaked. And I'm just like, what is going on? And then I felt wings on my side, and I felt myself again coming out of my body again. And I was able to go on my, spirit tone of a bird around the entire temple. And I saw one strand of energy connecting each and every congregant in that temple. I saw their thoughts, I saw the separation, but I saw this one strand of energy connecting everyone. And for me, it's all I needed to see. You see, we go by a lot of sayings in New Age. We are all one, we are interconnected. All this stuff, which is great, but when you have direct experience of it, it changes a faith, it turns a belief to a faith, to a knowing that's undeniable. And from this experience, I just can never look at, brothers and sisters the same way. I just know with every part of my being that we are one. We could experience separation. We could go, around like that, kind of like fingers on a hand. We could go around thinking we're a thumb or an index finger. I'm not going to say the middle finger, ring finger, whatever it is. Most people think they're the middle finger these days, but I don't know. But we are more than the fingers of the hand. We are just the hand of God itself, and we are part of a much, bigger file than ever imaginable. So if anything else, is to remind ourselves, we don't die. We are one. We are brothers and sisters here in God's playground, here to have a beautiful experience. I always thought to myself, what's in a name and why my name is Jacob? Certainly I grew up in Orthodox tradition, and those of you familiar with Jacob from the Bible, he was someone who was featured in Genesis. But the name Jacob was something that I just wondered, like, why Jacob? Why that name? And I know it's a segue from my next book, which is called The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. And that's really a lot of the pure concrete lessons of the hereafter for the here now, so that we don't have to wait till I'm not going to say dive, but till the body goes, to have that awareness that we could live in pure loving awareness at each time and not wait, until the very end to see the endless new beginning. But Jacob, for those of you unfamiliar with, was being chastised and chased by his brother Esau. And Jacob was running for his life. And in moments of refuge, he laid in a place called what is now referred to as Beit El, or Bethel, the house of God as we know it, a place that I've been in Israel. And he sat and he slept and he had a dream. And in Jacob's dream, he saw angels going up and down the ladder. And it was profound message to Jacob. Here he was fleeing for his life. He was near death, and he was seeing angels going up and down a ladder. I had my experience. I was on a ladder in a playground. I was shown death. I experienced death, but I experienced that there is no death, that there is, no such thing as death. We are eternal. And so from looking at the depths of darkness in the closest form, I was able to see the endless stars, the endless beautiful light, and darkness, where it was able to be a gateway for that. I would like for you to be with a quote today, and I do believe it's by Albert Camus. And the quote is, "Within the depths of winter, I find within itself the summer." And I'm paraphrasing some of that quote, but I want to preface that we don't need to suffer to have enlightenment. We are enlightened beings itself, but sometimes these experiences could be shake-up periods where we're holding on to suffering. We feel that that's reality, but in reality, it comes back to the nothingness of which it originated from, and all things come back to its source. So for myself and many other near-death experiencers, we do experience temporary turbulence. We do experience trauma. That's a real human experience, and that's why I'm able to recall it, I do believe. But beyond that, we see the true nature of reality, this endless light, this endless unconditional love that loves us for who we are and not what we do, which is so different than what we're used to. We're used to conditional responses, conditional ability to be loved for who we are. We get the good grade in school, we feel good about ourselves. We feel bad grade, get bad grade, feel bad. And so the spirit realm really loves us for who we truly are. So many of us have doubt, though. I think a lot of people, what stops them is self-esteem, is that they don't see themselves as someone who they see as spiritual. They don't see the reflection of some of the teachers or some of the teachings. They see that as othered. I was once getting a reading, and during the reading, my grandfather came in. And in the reading, he said, "Why do you doubt yourself? Because when you doubt yourself, you not only doubt yourself, but you insult and doubt me and all those who love you." And those in the spirit realm aren't necessarily insulted, but for us to understand, their language, in a sense that to doubt ourselves is to doubt the spirit realm, to doubt God, to doubt the beauty that's inside of us, and sometimes we internalize other people's limitations, with how we see ourselves and their, limited viewpoints. And so I think what's very important, as people go through this journey, is the value of self-actualization, the value of each and every day finding a different way to see yourself And as you live from the inside out and enhance how you love, view, and see yourself, the nature of reality shifts and changes, where you're able to see the world through a different lens. Indeed, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if you notice that, you could be talking about God knows what, and some person will come to you and will make you feel like $1,000,000, and the next person will try to drag you down and make you feel like zero. And little of it has to do with you, as Don Miguel Ruiz teaches in the Four Agreements, that it's not personal. Much of it has to do with not you. So with that being said, I know we discussed just a quick break. So maybe we could take that. And I see some of you have already jumped the gun or in the chat. That's great. So please bring your questions. I don't know exactly, how it works in terms of, calling on people. But, please bring your questions and then we could get to that. I'm sorry, Diane. Yeah.
That's okay. I was going to say a good way to ask questions is through the chat box. And I can either read them to you or you can just look at them yourself and answer them, whichever you prefer to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw we had a couple, maybe you could switch off or something. But what I will say is this, for questions that I don't have an answer to, I could refer to, maybe some participant or Diane. But for those that I can't answer to, I will do the very best I could. As I say, ask and you shall receive, right? So,
Absolutely.
when we have that question, we already have that answer. They're tied into another. So I'll be right back in just a moment, okay?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn the program over to Marcia, who's going to talk about our organization and what we need.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Unmute yourself. Marcia, unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yes?
Still mute? Yeah. Yes. Gotcha.
Okay. I just thought of what Jacob said, ask and you shall receive. So I'm here on behalf of Diane and Cheyenne's to talk about donating to our organization. When we were meeting at Evanston Hospital, we were asking people for $20 or whatever you can afford to keep us going. Even though we're not at the hospital, we're still incurring
Heading up.
costs. I'm sorry, what's it, Diane? Okay, we're still incurring costs for computers, office expenses. We are also supporting 3 girls in Nepal. We've put them through school and for their living expenses. So we could appreciate if you're enjoying this and if you'd like to see us to keep going, to please help donate whatever you can. You can go to chicagoiands.org and go to donations. And we have a Zelle account you can go to, or you can mail it to a PO box. We're also a 501(c)(3) organization, so we're tax deductible. And that's it. So I'm asking, I hope we shall receive. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we still have a minute or two until we get Jake back. He should be short. He had something he had to do quickly at 3 o'clock. So I told him it was okay. So, but he's going to talk now about the things he talks about in the book and how he evolved as in his life as a result of his near-death experience, which is a really good thing. I can add that we're now booked through March and maybe even April. We've got some wonderful people coming, and I hope you all join us. Okay, it's back. So now we're going to hear about what happened after his near-death experience. Yes, Jacob?
I'll share a bit of it. I think within my NDE, what I really tried to do was to really give back what I was given. In a sense, in moments of intense suffering and suffocation, I was given awareness of the breath of eternity, the breath that we're created from, what we call the breath of God. And so for myself, that was a big calling card to get into the work that I do, that really our life is so much bigger than us, and service is really the closest embodiment of divine and our purpose. And so I was very motivated to try to give back in many ways what I was given. And so that was a big calling card in my work as a psychotherapist who works with clients from the ground up and works as a hypnotist, works in mindfulness, meditation, and just different ways to kind of alter consciousness. As we know, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And I do believe in helping others each and every way, and it's alter their worldviews, and always each and every day in each and every way, we can do that. So this near-death experience was really first and foremost about giving back what I was provided. The other thing is I've used it as a tool, I guess for myself, in moments where I felt very much stuck in my human experience and my suffering. And certainly I'm not immunized from that, nor do I think anyone is. When we have different experiences on the outside and circumstances, I fell in love with mindfulness, which I use with my clients and run different groups with. And everyone has a different interpretation of mindfulness. But I love Dr. John Kabat-Zinn's definition of it, where if you're familiar with Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, he incorporated mindfulness really here, in the United States. He was a big pillar and catalyst of it at the University of Massachusetts. But Dr. John Kabat-Zinn said mindfulness, is a practice by which our lives are, I would say, he said that our lives depend on, our whole lives depend on our ability to be mindful. And when you look at that at a deeper surface, he's right, because in a sense that when we're not being present, we're not living while we are living. Death is something that happens to all of us, but life in pure living is a choice of depth. Like, how deep could we live? How connected could we be? And so I think there's many people who are alive, but they're not alive truly. And as you know, people who are called dead, they're more alive than ever. So I feel the practice of mindfulness is a celebration of life. And I use my near-death experience for myself and my clients within this everyday practice. Each time we're kind of getting stuck, we remind ourselves, what's real versus what's an experience. I'd also reminded myself that there's something to this experience, that we're not just here to be tortured. We're not just here to suffer. Beyond that, there's an opportunity, for us here. There's a reason. As a child, I had a lot of this same dream and visitation that was really annoying the crap out of me. But I would just see it over and over again, where I just remembered that my soul was in this room and getting ready for itself to come into this earth. And you call that the pre-life charting phase. But I just had clear recollection of this moment, and it would always come to me time and time again. But I look back on that, I just reminded myself how this is not a random existence, how there's a greater intelligence, with us. And I think part of it is learning to trust in that infinite intelligence greater than our own fears, our own judgments, our situations, our own limitations, which comes with fear, which, fear could be very real. Someone, all these people saying false evidence appearing real, or someone comes up to you, trying to attack you. Yeah, it's a real hardwired response, from the reptilian brain, but other situations, we can really distinguish. In psychotherapy, I use a term called HAT, which is something that's horrible, awful, terrible, versus fad, frustrating, annoying, and disappointing. And many times, we wire ourselves for things that really aren't that big of a deal, that we condition ourselves to be the end of the world. And from going to the depths of darkness, the depths of fears. I do the two biggest things that scare people the most. I do public speaking and I talk about death. These are the two biggest fears that people have. And so I could tell you there's great value. For those listening, as a therapist, from the ground up, people ask me, like, what advice do you have as a psychotherapist? I would say as a therapist, I work with people very closely on something called exposure therapy, meaning, for instance, you have a fear of bees. Instead of just talking about it all day, obviously you could have like sounds around you, or some of my clients, they're as adventurous to go not right up to a beehive, but by it. And by doing that, you're able to have a different interpretation of it, an understanding of it. And death is a little bit complicated when it comes to exposure therapy, because I'm not going to ask people to try to have self-induced near-death experiences. But the concept of talking about it, the concept of contemplating it, the concept of viewing it in a different light, allows a lot of the stigma and fear, and more importantly, meaning to have in people's lives. And I think near-death experiences also could help people who have lost loved ones as well too. I work very closely with a lot of different evidential mediums. We have a lot of big gallery events, because a lot of people, at least in New York, they want the medium stuff, right? That's what they gravitate to. They want the personalization of it. But with near-death experiences, when they come out of the workshops, they are able to have an awareness of different paths up to the mountain, how they're looking for evidence of eternity, but they can look at near-death experiences as that big piece that we die, but we're here right in front of you. And what bigger piece of eternity do you want than near-death experiencers? I've also learned the power of the brain, how really when my brain stopped working and suffocated, how I was really able to use it later in life, and how that opened everything up for me once my brain stopped working. And so that really guided my work as a hypnotist and to work in meditation, in a sense that within hypnosis meditation, we understand the different brainwave frequencies that we have. And so many of us are in unknowingly states of fight or flight, anxiety, very, kind of there's alpha, beta, theta, and delta stages. And so when you're able to get into those deeper brainwave frequencies, you're able to really be a conduit of guidance, information. You're able to have that GPS of your life working a little bit more into high gear. And so I really value the brain as something that's an ally, but not a creator of life. And many people ask, what's the brain's role in life? I was listening to Dr. Bruce Grayson. Some of you are familiar with Bruce. He was talking about the brain, and he mentioned, along with Dr. Raymond Moody, I'm sure said this, that the brain is not a producer of life, it's just a filter of life. And for instance, if you look at people who have done LSD, for instance, their brainwave frequencies are actually decreased, or people who have Alzheimer's, who have that, I forget the term, but they have this like awakening, where all of a sudden, as they're about to go, they have clear recollection, they're having like conversations with loved ones, but yet the brainwave frequencies are going south, and it sometimes has false hope, for family members in hospice care. But that just shows you that there's a brain, but then there's also a separation of a mind too, that the brain does not create the mind, that they exist, really as two separate entities. Near-death experience really reminded me, of this, and how much the brain could be an impact in our life between the two worlds, the earth realm as well as the spirit realm. And I believe that the more open that the brain is, the more that we're able to receive and to have information, and to live a guided, life, in harmony with higher awareness. I would also say that, so many of us forget who we are. Plato once said that some people drink less or more of the waters of forgetfulness. Some have more amnesia, less amnesia. I do believe you're all here because there's a part of what I'm discussing and other near-death experiencers are discussing that hits a very deep chord in you. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here today. And I think there's universality in near-death experiences, if you've had one or not, in a sense that they touch an eternal part of ourselves that we remember. You know, as a child, I was always fascinated by Robin Williams in the movie Hook. I love that movie for those of you who saw it, but for those of you who don't, Hook is basically like a spin-off on Peter Pan. You know, in the movie, Robin Williams was kind of like this everyday business guy. But then one day, something changed and he went back to Neverland and tried to rescue his kids and went on this whole adventure. And then he came back. And that's kind of the way it is for us in our life, near-death experiencers, that in a sense that we go around our everyday kind of mundane life, but then something, a part of ourselves says, this isn't right. And we have this shake-up period. We can no longer look at life the same way. In a sense, we remember that there was once a time where we could fly, that we were in a place of love, that we had no pain in us. We, had euphoria. And a lot of people, when they practice this work, they get in touch with that. They get into the spa of the soul. They're able to recharge their inner being. And so I think the idea is to not charge our cell phones more than we charge our souls or soul phones, right? We want to do this deep inner work. But my life was not immunized by conflict, and Life After Breath really does talk about that. And if you do get my book, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. But I do that for many different reasons. It's not a vendetta. No, that's not the case. It's a book because I think a lot of people, when they hear near-death experiencer speak, they tend to other them or put them on pedestals. Like, these people have something that I don't. But I think the book allows relatability of the human experience and also possibilities to transcend and transform. Trans meaning change and form meaning our shape within our life. And so through these difficult moments, near-death experience and beyond, we all are catalysts of this light and beings of inner and outer transformation. So with that, I do want to open up the floor for a couple minutes for some questions. And maybe if it's okay with you, we could close with a guided short meditation. And then after that, we'll stay connected always, whatever way we can. Yeah. I cannot hear you.
We have a couple of questions on the chat. Sarah asked if there were any consequences associated with committing suicide, or was it like another type of death?
Right. I do believe our language matters. I know suicide is a very sensitive topic. I recently lost a best friend to it, this time last year. I would say, a lot of people say completed. I don't say commit, because like commit kind of has like a criminal kind of thing. You commit a crime. I think with suicide, and I could only speak from my own direct experience, I had full recall that I was not in hell. I wasn't in purgatory. I was in pure light and pure love. And I wasn't punished. I think a lot of people project religion onto this stuff where there's, punishment. I believe that I was able to have an opportunity within this current life that I'm living to move the needle of my soul's progression and to really apply what I know into my experience. So I think the soul at its core is all knowing, but we come into different lifetimes with some forgetfulness. And if we apply what we know, we become that. We become that. We elevate ourselves. We're not just people with wisdom outside of ourselves, but we become the wisdom itself. We become the lesson. We're not just thinking about it, talking about it. We are it, if that makes sense. I would also say that when you make that choice, there is work, and work, I guess, has a bad vibration associated to it, but there is opportunity. those who do that, they're often, here to help people, to make maybe more elevated choices, to make the high road choices, and they work on the other side. So, the work never ends over here, over there. It continues. For instance, right after my friend, made that decision, within a second later, after hearing about that choice, I got a call from a major Long Island radio station to do a big show. And I just know that was him. And he came through during that show with the medium that was on it, and he was messing with the technology. I know near-death experiences can mess with technology, but that's never happened to me before. And so, in a sense, we live through them. They work through us, and, they have different groups that they're a part of to really, do a lot of work over there to help people out. I hope that makes sense. But no, I wasn't judged. I wasn't put in a place of darkness. I guess the darkness that I had was how much I forgot about who I was and what I was forever connected to. You could bury a body, but you can never bury a soul. And sometimes our souls can feel truly buried through pain and suffering. But when we are able to remind ourselves of who we really are, what we connect to, that could allow us, to really be more resilient and to have greater forces at hand. I think a lot of people try to muscle it on their own and try to do it on their own. And that's how we're taught. We're taught that we have to be Mr. and Mrs. Atlas and do it on our own. But in the spirit realm, from letting go, we can grow. It's not about holding on. It's about being able to let go and to surrender and to be in flow with ourselves and help from those in the satellites in the heavens. Hope that makes sense.
Ah, it's gone. Come back.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
The next question is, did you equate God with a source, or what was your image?
I do believe God is a subjective experience. I think what always frustrated me with religion was I understood it, but it was very generalized. I think God, to me, is a subjective personal relationship, but also to me, God is, from what I experienced, my near-death experience, this endless pinnacle of creative source energy, where all things emanate from and are connected to. And so within our lives, we're used to having an experience, but there's almost a cap on that experience. We just kind of feel really good and amazing, but we kind of feel a cap. And when I was on the other side and experienced God, it was scary because when we think of infinite, that's often associated with God, the infinite creator. But I was able to experience infinite in infinite ways. So it was timeless, it was limitless. The highs and euphoria and beauty of it was no limit. And that's not something we can understand through just the verbal word. These are language, this is a word, this is linear. These are kind of non-linear things, but I think it's a familiarity of the deep part of us. And so, when I have these conversations, it's our degree of understanding comes from our degree and vantage point of consciousness. When we're coming from a deep place, we'll be able to really conceptualize some of these deep things that resonates or makes sense.
Great, thank you. Joe asked, this is all sounds warm and fuzzy about us being one, but how do you account for the fact that there are those of us who are criminals who commit violent acts against humanity? I'm not one with them.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. It's something that I think about each and every day. But what I would say, Joe, is something that I will come back to, a quote that I said from Plato. Some people, have less or more forgetfulness from those waters of amnesia. Some people remember who they are. In regards to criminality, that's a whole other can of worms from the ground up to really dissect and divulge. And so I don't want to go down that exact rabbit hole, but there's a saying that hurt people, heal people, try to heal people. And so it comes many ways from this place of pain and suffering. And when people do that, they're not in accordance with the oneness of reality. To me, the reality is when you burn everything away, what's left? And so all these things come and go, but only love is there. I'm living proof of it. I had the utmost suffering and suffocation, and I am here today to tell you that love prevails, love wins. But it's not something for me to really speak on because so many of people who have experienced the other side of this, can't say the same, and they are in a place of pain and suffering, something that could torture their whole lives. And so I don't want to speak for those people. They have their own interpretation of it. But from a higher vantage point, from a spirit realm, there is a greater reality that exists beyond suffering, beyond pain. And when people are able to really understand that of who they are, when you remember who you are, you can remember who we are. And a lot of people forget that. And that's where they maybe go down darkness. But there's many different reasons, and for time reasons, it's hard to get into the all. I mean, a lot of it could be trauma, a lot of it could be, sociopathic conditions, and just very deeply, deep, psychological, conditions. So there's a lot of different stuff, but
When I was on the other side, one of the things I was told in capital letters is that nothing is as bad as we think it is. And that's of interest to me. And I've thought about it a lot too. I think because we're here to learn lessons, you have to have somebody to push against to learn lessons. If everything, that's why we come here, because if we stayed at home, we don't have the negativity there to push against to make us learn faster. And when we're here on Earth, we come, it's like going to the gym and you're pushing against all these machines and stuff, and you get stronger faster.
right.
And I think the Earth School allows us to get stronger faster. And it's through our interaction with negativity. And because we all have free will, we have a choice whether we want to interact in a positive or a negative way. And some people choose positive and some choose negative. It's important, I think, to remember that little lesson I learned, which is that nothing is as bad as we think it is. All different roles. I believe we were reborn, and we come in all different guises. We come black, white, lesbian, gay. We come every different way, because the more different ways we come, the more lessons we learn. It enriches our soul. It doesn't detract from it. It helps teach us what's really important, which is that love is truly all that matters.
Perfectly said. Thank you.
Yeah.
You got to put that in the book, yeah?
You go, Diane. That was one of your better ones, I have to admit.
I'm not hearing anything. I don't know whether I'm missing something or I've lost.
You're good, Diane. Just next question. You're good. We all hear you.
The next question was from Craig Rodich. He says, the issue of abortion is so much in the forefront today. What is the spiritual perspective of abortion versus political? Do you have some comments about that, Jacob?
Yeah, no, it's normally an issue that I really don't go down. It's a very sensitive topic, What I would say is I do believe there's a plan, for souls, and nothing is by random. Like you said, there's different experiences, for each soul, and I'll leave it there. It's a part of a journey, but knowing that, these beings come in and come out throughout lifetimes for reasons. And but when it comes to that, I normally don't try to go down that because it's so divisive, and everyone's got their own take, and that's, I guess, the beauty of our country is we have opinions.
Yeah, well, I would suggest anybody might appreciate more learning about this through Echo Bodine's eyes. She's a wonderful experiencer and an intuitive from Minneapolis, and she's written a number of books, and she wrote a book called Echoes of the Soul,
Mhm.
to play on her name. And in that book, she talks about how she was in the delivery room with mothers when they were having their children, and she saw the spirit standing there waiting to go into the body. And she was told that the spirits really don't go into the body until the baby is born. And from what I've learned since then is that that's not necessarily true, and that there is no one way to do anything. There's many ways to do things as there are souls in the universe, and that they're all acceptable in God's eyes.
Mhm.
And so some people might take a trip into the body of the fetus just to try it out. I've heard reports of that. And occasionally a young soul particularly will spend more time in the body of fetus. Most souls don't want to be bothered with it. They'd rather be doing something else.
Oh.
And so most souls aren't in the body until it's born. And it's a clump of cells of human tissue. And that's basically all it is. And if you've read Carol Bowman's books about children's past lives, she talks extensively at various points about how children who don't survive one pregnancy, the same soul comes in the next body.
Right.
So nothing is lost. It's all there, and it's just different paths. And so I think the spiritual view is that it's between the soul and God, and their own personal life path. That's just
Right.
what I've observed in my work over
Absolutely.
the last 20 years.
I think it's a very personal decision between that person and God. It really is. And yeah, I agree.
But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's not, nothing is as bad as we think it is.
Right. It's a very personal, intimate decision with that person and God. Yeah.
Marilyn says you totally make sense, and I agree, and I really appreciate your being here today. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions? Give you to the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If not, we can go ahead and go. And I hope you'll all join us next week. I wanted also to mention that last month we had a short discussion about Jack Bonsick, who has previously spoken for us at the end of the meeting, after a lot of people had already left, actually. But I called Jack afterwards, and Jack spoke for us about 20 years that he was killed when he was working on a car, and he was under the car, and the car fell on him, and he became paralyzed from the neck down. And he died. He had a near-death experience, and it was a very fascinating one. And he came back and he discovered he could talk to the cells in his body. And he began to release the paralysis. And it took him 7 years, but he finally got the paralysis down to his mid-calf. And he's paralyzed from his mid-calf to his big toes. But above that, he said, by then I could walk. And he said, I got tired of doing it. So I just got braces for my ankles and went on with my life. He was an airline pilot. And he continued to work. And I talked to him and he's going to be our speaker in January. So visiting his story, he said that when he spoke to us before, it was in 2004. He didn't feel that he really was too eager to talk about it, but he said over the years he's reassessed that and figured that it's very important that he talk about it. So now he's willing to talk to us again. So I'm very pleased to have that. So that's our January speaker. And I wanted to mention that because we'd had a conversation at the end of the last meeting about him. So he will be coming. So anyway, thank you all for joining us. We're so happy to have you here, and hope to see you next month. And please donate. Our donations have been very low, and we have a lot of expenses to keep things going. I pay for the services that provide the emails and so on and so forth, and keep things going in the hope that eventually we'll be back in full swing. But we really do appreciate the donations. So thank you very much. See you all next month.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.